Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's special guest is Andrew Klavan. Subscribe here wherever you get your podcasts and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Merry Christmas, everyone. I gave a little gift to myself this week by asking one of my favorite thinkers to join Undercurrents for a special holiday edition of the show. The great Andrew Klavan, host of The Andrew Klavan Show, agreed to sit down with me for a deep and very meaningful conversation, from my perspective at least, about Christmas in the midst of what some writers, like our guest Rod Dreher, are referring to as the re-enchantment, a post-COVID great awakening driving spiritually impoverished Westerners back to God, so the theory goes. Here's Donald Trump in 2016, shortly after being elected, making a statement of saying Merry Christmas.
So when I started 18 months ago, I told my first crowd in Wisconsin that we're going to come back here someday and we are going to say Merry Christmas again. Merry Christmas. So Merry Christmas, Evan. Happy New Year, but Merry Christmas.
Now, here's a child yelling Merry Christmas to Jill Biden a few days ago, right after the First Lady said Happy Holidays.
Hello. How are you? Hi. Happy holidays. Hi.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Yes.
So what role has this vibe shift played in the culture war for Christians who've seen the shift to a more multicultural happy holidays as evidence of decline for years? What does the re-enchantment discourse mean at one of the most religiously charged seasons of the year? What does it mean for a holiday that defines and drives so many of our core memories and relationships with family and friends? Are Christians to blame for the consumer culture that swirls around our annual celebration of Christ's birth? Andrew Klavan, host of The Andrew Klavan Show, joins me now to discuss. Andrew Klavan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, Andrew, maybe a good place to start is if you could just talk to us a little bit about your favorite Christmas traditions as somebody who actually converted. Tell us a little bit about your traditions in your household, what they mean to you, and how you like to celebrate.
Well, the most important tradition, the funny thing is over the years, because of my deepening religious life, the most important thing I do is go to church on Christmas, and especially take communion, which has kind of become the center of my religious practice. And so that, that's a big deal. But then there are all the likewise important traditions of like having these incredible croissants my wife makes on Christmas morning, which are the best croissants ever made. And what we do is on Christmas Eve, we eat these really crummy hors d'oeuvres, which I love, like pigs in a blanket that, are frozen and you heat them up. And then in the morning, we have these incredible croissants, which is, as far as I'm concerned, are as close to the real meaning of Christmas as you can come. And then, the most important thing, I guess, after all of that is people coming to see us. We love to see our grandchildren. We love to see my daughter and my son and their families. And it's just, that just means the world to me. So it's the only other thing that is an absolute requirement is that we watch the 1951 version of A Christmas Carol with Alastair Sim, because it is, in spite of what heretics who watch the Muppets or some crazy stuff like that, it is the only great movie version of A Christmas Carol, because of Alastair Sim's amazing performance in which he plays Scrooge as a self-justified man, which no one else does. No, everyone plays Scrooge as a mean, kind of miserable guy. But Alastair Sim plays him as a man with a philosophy that he believes is right and everybody else is a fool. And that is the way I've noticed most miserable people behave. Whether it's the anti-Semites on X or whatever, they all think they're absolutely right in spite of the fact that they're making themselves and everyone around them miserable. And that's the way Alastair Sim plays Scrooge. He's just a real person in the movie, and it's a brilliant script. And so we watch that every single year. And every single year we just turn to each other at the end and say, great movie. And that, those are my Christmas traditions.
That's a pretty good one. The endurance of Dickens is actually an interesting point in the conversation I wanted to have with you, Andrew, in that it is curious that in a time of commercialization and secularization, almost to the point of that being the dominant cultural tone of Christmas in the West now, Dickens endures, so many people still watch Christmas Carol. And I guess this is part of, again, what I wanted to ask you about is, do we have a thoroughly secularized Christmas in the West, or is it still, dominated by the Christ part of Christmas?
Well, we obviously have a thoroughly secularized version of Christmas in the West, but the question is it the only version we have? And it's not. I mean, there are still many, many people who celebrate Christmas as the birth of Christ, which is really the only way that it comes to life and makes sense. There's an untrue rumor that goes around every year that Christmas is really a pagan holiday that's been Christianized. And my argument about that is, even if it were true, that would be a beautiful thing, that Christianity should, in fact, take beautiful things and turn them into itself, because it is, as Tolkien told C.S. Lewis, it is the myth that has come true. And so it is all these myths put together into one actual historical spiritual event. And so there's nothing wrong with having some pagan things like a Christmas tree, Christianized. But no, we are in a crisis of faith, and I believe we reached a turning point in that crisis. I believe we're in the just at the very start of an upturn in a renewal of faith. But at this moment, when we're at the very bottom of that crisis, there's simply no question that even the very language of faith has gone out of the world. The left and the mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, make fun of us for saying it's important to say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. But consider how often the words with which we speak about God and the Spirit have been secularized and psychologized out of existence, so that we hardly even have the language to communicate what we know. That this is a period of deep, deep blindness, as many people are saying. My son just wrote a brilliant book about it. Light of the mind, light of the world, or vice versa, but it's one or the other. But it's a book about the fact that science at one point seemed to point to materialism. It no longer does, and it hasn't for 100 years. And it's only the media and the chattering classes who insist that it still does. Science, in fact, points to something far more complex and far more biblical than what we think. But we've stripped ourselves even of the language with which to talk about God and talk about the Spirit. And because of that, when you can't say something, you can't see it. It's a very weird thing. If you don't have the words to come into your minds, you cannot accept that it's there. So even when I have deeply spiritual experiences, deeply invisible encounters with an invisible reality, have a hard time believing in my own heart that that's what's happening. And I instantly have this little machine that goes on and explains it away. If I have a prophetic dream, if I have an encounter with a spirit that is outside of physical reality, I immediately explain it away, because that is what we've been taught to do. And so we need a language that includes our new technical knowledge, our new scientific knowledge, but also includes what we've lost, because the deal we made with materialism, the deal we made with science, was that we would put the human experience away in order to find out objective truths. And now we know there are no objective truths. There is only this collaboration between spiritual reality and the human mind. That's all there is. There is not things that we have thought were either absolute or conditional, like masculinity and femininity, are in fact collaborative creations of God and the image of God, namely us. They may look totally different in heaven, but here they look like certain things, and we have an obligation to them, and so on. So this spiritual reality has become invisible to us because we can't speak about it. And so we are in the moment when people are beginning to realize this. They're beginning to realize that we have to have the courage to say what we see, to say what we experience, and without getting too woo-woo about it, without talking about, UFOs becoming interdimensional, spirits or anything like that, but simply understanding that the reality is interpenetrated by the Spirit. And the very fact that we're here is a daily, ongoing miracle that needs to be addressed as a miracle, because stranger things happen than science will let us know about. And so, this is a moment of crisis, and we shouldn't say it's not, but a moment of crisis is not necessarily a moment of disaster. It's simply a turning point. And I think the way is turning to the good for some of us, and some will be left behind, but others will find a new way to believe in a new language in which to express that belief, but it'll be the same old belief as ever. So that's the moment I think we're in.
And I want to channel Tom Holland here for a moment, but not with the accent because nobody would appreciate it.
I'm a big Tom fan, so that's okay. Do your best.
If we go to the end of Dominion and sort of this argument that at least the Reformation, but if not Christianity itself, has led down the path of quote unquote wokeness. I don't remember if Tom uses that word directly, but basically the postmodern sense of objective reality is not objective. It's sort of individual truths, etc. Do you feel as though if the re-enchantment leads to this reinvigorated language of supernature, Christians are kind of undermining the point that there's something in the Christian faith that opens us up to individuality, aggressive individuality, radical individuality, and that creeps into sort of our sense of objectivity? Is that a possible outcome? Is that a possible sort of arc for this movement? Is it something that worries you? If I was Tom Holland here, what would you say to me?
It's a great haircut, Tom. That's an amazing.
Yes.
No, I think that the tension between the church and the individual is built into the religion. It's there the moment the Gospels end. It is there in the epistles and in the history, in Acts, and in the building of the church. And the reason for it is simply this: a church is a vessel for carrying Christ into the world, but Christ is a vessel for individual salvation. Your path to Christ is not going to be the same as mine. And the Emily that it creates, which is the Emily image of God, is not going to be the Andrew image of God. That is a very beautiful, wonderful thing. And we have to have some patience with that. We have to stop telling people that they can't be themselves and that there's a one-size-fits-all for every situation and every religious situation. But we do know certain things that have to be cleared out of the way in order, pardon me, in order to achieve that individual vision. So you can't murder, you can't commit adultery, you can't create graven images and worship them. These are things that we know are going to take you astray off the road.
You can't have fun, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they can be fun. I understand. But what the church has done, which I think is wrong, has posed them as the religion. These don't do's are what their religion is all about. And they actually have nothing to do with the religion. They're a way of clearing the obstacles toward an encounter with Christ. It's not that you can't do evil things and still encounter Christ. In fact, we know you can. It happens in the Gospels. But they're obstacles. They're things that you want to get out of your way. Addiction is an obstacle, like adultery is an obstacle. These are things that give access to harmful influences that take you away from that core identity that you have. And surprise, that core identity actually has nothing to do with your physical desires. It actually has to do with something very much deeper that is expressed through your body, but is not your body. And so this tension is not a bad thing. You can come and take communion and kneel at the communion rail and know that the person next to you lives a very different life than yours and maybe even has opinions that you hate and maybe even does some things that you know for a fact are self-destructive. And yet you can trust that that person is in God's hands and God is beckoning them along the road to himself. And that is why Christ literally tells us, do not judge. Every time I say this, people shake, Christians are like, no, that's not what he's saying. That is exactly what he's saying. He's not saying that you don't know the difference between right and wrong. He's not saying that you can't say something's good or bad. He's simply saying you do not know what I am doing with the creature next to you. Pay attention to what I'm doing to you and follow that path. A little bit more of that and a little bit less of doctrine and doctrinarianism. And I think that we can find a way back to a free society, but a society that doesn't make freedom a golden calf. That's where we're at now. You can't become a woman if you're a man. You can't become a man if you're a woman. Those are that gender assignment comes from elsewhere. It comes from heaven, and it is an assignment. It actually comes with responsibilities. Men have responsibilities to be manly, and women have responsibilities to be womanly that are sometimes difficult and sometimes constrain us in our actions and make us go a way we don't want to go instead of a way that we might want to go in that moment. But so those are things that we all have to deal with, but all of us deal with them in a different way. When we make freedom a golden calf and we say, well, no, you can erase the assignments of your body, you change anything you want, you can do anything you want, then we're simply leading people astray into terrible, terrible um, malfunction and dysfunction. And so that, that these things are tensions, that there are trade-offs, that there are difficulties, that there are struggles, are things we don't even talk about. We basically erase every gray area. Not Christians, non-Christians do this. And they tell you, well, if you say that I shouldn't have a certain kind of sex or this is wrong, then you have done violence to my essential identity. That's just not true. And I'm willing to sit and chat with you about it, and I'm not going to stone you because that's against my religion. But I think that we at least should be able to have that discussion in church and out of church and all throughout our society. We've essentially, because of the failure of secularism to deliver any form of happiness whatsoever, it is a completely immiserating philosophy. It makes everybody unhappy. They can only silence everybody who opposes it. Anybody who says race is actually not a definitive thing, but gender is a bigot and must be silenced and must be taken off social media. That's the sign of a failed philosophy. You can say anything you want to me, and I will discuss it with you. I don't have to silence you because I am have got my hands on something essentially true, which is Jesus Christ. And so I don't have to silence you. I can love you and take you in, even though I know that some of the things you're doing are going to hurt you, and even though I know that some of the things you believe are provably untrue. The people who silence you are always the people you have to watch because they're always the people who have this sneaking suspicion that what they're telling you is a lie. Only people who are uttering falsehoods have to silence the opposition. And so that's the situation we're in this moment. But I have a great deal of hope that when things stop making sense, people ultimately stop believing them, and I think that's the place we've gotten to.
Yeah, I wonder if you could say more. I know you've been corresponding a little bit with Spencer, your son, about language. Spencer's a linguist, in particular. I guess in the context of Christmas, I mean, it's sort of striking if you go back and read A Christmas Carol and you read Dickens how spiritual the language is. Explicitly. And we take it kind of for granted now how very particularly Christian that story is, and it remains very popular, as we were just talking about. But even the language that surrounds Christmas in the West, in the US, in the UK, are there examples that come to mind about how we have sort of stripped it of supernature, or we've even taken terms that were long seen as religious, as Christian, and they're just, they've been deadened or dulled to be secularized? What comes to mind when you think about Christmas in that context?
Well, I think of all the things that look for meaning rather than experience, by which I mean the things that can be interpreted into naturalistic truths instead of experienced as supernature. So this is the kind of ongoing argument. I'm not sure where he stands now, but this is the ongoing argument I have with my Daily Wire colleague, Jordan Peterson, whom I love. He's a wonderful person and a wonderful mind and all this. But the Jungian idea is we cannot know whether God uh, is simply the human experience of totality or whether he's really out there. And I think that's right. We cannot know. That's why faith is counted as a virtue, because in faith we have the evidence of things we cannot know. And so I see this all the time in Christmas is what you should be doing, instead of what I should be doing about Christmas. How can you believe this but you don't do this, and how can you do that? You don't do that. Instead of the silent encounter with the living God that Christmas celebrates. We can only know God. We can't, as the Bible says, no one has seen God. And what we know now, we only know through a glass darkly. So we should be a little bit uncertain about ourselves, a little bit less loud and bold in our assertions. But we should not be afraid to encounter God, to pray to him and talk to him and listen to his response, to know him as Jesus and contemplate him on the cross and in the manger, to contemplate this journey of his mother, which I think is central to the story of Christianity, and to know him in all these ways that we are given to know him through ritual, through rites, through song, through all the Christmas traditions that seem minor but are in fact deeply, deeply important. What we don't need is sentimentality. And the reason Dickens is such a genius, and every time I want to dismiss him as a great writer because of his sentimentalism or because of his simplistic social ideas, I go back and read him and I remember, oh no, he's actually a genius. There's no dismissing him. He is of one of the three greatest novelists who ever lived. And A Christmas Carol is actually the only great Christmas story outside of the Bible. There are plenty of good, entertaining ones, but that is when it was published, it was called the Fifth Gospel, and it really is as close as possible to that being true. And what it is an encounter with the self through the lens of spirituality. So the reason Alistair Sim is so brilliant as Scrooge is because everything Alistair Sim says is true. He says, like, that it's enough for a man to pay attention to his own business. Mine occupies me constantly, and if I don't do business, I won't have money, and if I don't have money, the world will shame me. And you mock me for making money, but you also abuse me if I'm poor. All these things are true. And all that happens to him on Christmas Eve is that the spirits, not ghosts, right? Remember, only Marley is a ghost, the others are spirits. The spirit of Christmas comes to him and shows him himself in the context of his past and in his present life and in his future and his death. That's all that happens. And when he awakes, everything is different, but nothing is different. None of his past sins are gone. None of his losses are recouped. None of the people he's hurt have been healed. All that has happened is that he has changed. That in the Gospels is called metanoia, a change of mind, and which is all Jesus calls us to is metanoia, and that's what has happened to Scrooge, and that's why it's such a genius story. And that is what we should always be looking for. And everything else, the language of sentimentality and even homeness, which I love home, and I think home is a very important, underrated thing. But all of those things are only ways of getting at the experience. Just like church is only a way of getting at the experience of this relationship with God that has been offered to us. We cannot have a relationship with a God we cannot know, and Jesus is the God we can know. There's a God we can't know. I mean, there is a father to Christ that we don't ever really get our heads around. But Christ is there so that we can know him, lives and dies so that we can know him, rises again so that we can know ourselves. And all of these things, again, are a matter of language, again, are a way of talking about Christmas that has gone out of fashion. That we either have these people, and God bless them, they're fighting a cultural fight, but they're just screaming in your ear about, about all the things that are wrong with our society today. Um, but that's not the point. The world you always have with you. The world is always a problem. The world is always false. Its desires are false. Its values are false. The things it tells you to cherish are false. All of these things have always been true. Jesus says they're true. Shakespeare says they're true. Everybody says they're true who's ever paid any attention at all. And Dickens says they're true. And when you encounter Dickens in a language that is in some ways more modern than the Gospels and more immediate and more contemporary, you suddenly see, oh yes, I do believe this, even though when I hear it as philosophy or when somebody preaches it to me from the pulpit, I think I back up and my back goes up and I think, no, leave me alone, stop preaching at me, stop yelling at me. When Dickens shows it to me, I recognize myself in Scrooge. I recognize that there are moments when I can do the right thing and make a little less money and be a little less popular and have a book sell not as many copies, or I can do the wrong thing and get those clicks, those clicks that you want. You can get those clicks if you just say something hateful and angry and mean. And those are those moments that create your soul. Those are the moments that shape who you are, and those decisions have eternal ramifications. So all of these things are embedded in Dickens in this brilliant story, and he's such a great writer. that they just come to life for you in a way that they might not if you are inured by church to the words of the Gospels. If church has hardened you to hearing these things, you hear them every day. Somebody gives these stupid sermons. Almost every sermon you hear is is I don't know, has a certain emptiness to it because nobody can tell you exactly what you should do. Um, and yet Dickens creates a character. That is what fiction does. I mean, this is what novelists are always trying to do. Movie writers are always trying to do is create characters that are themselves, but are also you, you know? And that's what Dickens does so brilliantly, and why that story, I think, will never die as long as there's one Christian left in the world. He's going to be reading A Christmas Carol because it brings to life the values of the Gospels.
Yeah, it does seem like a case in point, but I also can't help now but picture you as sort of Scrooge, and then like Knowles as your Bob Cratchit, and you're yelling at him about clicks. Like, it's not about the money, it's about, or the coal, it's about more clicks,
But first,
Michael.
but first of all, Knowles deserves everything he gets, and I cannot dole out enough cruelty to make Knowles even with eternity. So
Amazing. You must be a very interesting case to your friend Jordan Peterson, who's obviously been talking a lot about the mythology of the religion, and Christmas is the central story, other than Easter, of course, of the sort of myth of Christ, as Jordan Peterson would see it. And there's always, to your point, about this discussion over, the Saturnalia turning into Christmas, and all of
right.
this about Herod's census and the historicity of Luke and Matthew, or discrepancies and all of that. So as somebody who came to the myth, as Jordan would say, do you see, I mean, you obviously came to the myth, as you've talked about many times, through the lens of like, this is truth. This is me being, subscribing to the facts and the history. What did the myth mean to you, do you think, as a Western man?
Well, here's the important thing. I mean, first of all, I do have a fairly radical and eccentric view of the Gospels, which is that they are a report of the truth. So imagine that a spaceman had landed on Earth, an alien from some other galaxy had landed on Earth, and people had written about what happened. And as it happened in the ancient days, they wrote about it a few decades after it happened, and maybe it was secondhand, but they preserved the story. They knew how to preserve oral traditions. And you have four versions of it that have been selected as the ones that are not too imaginative, that don't go crazy, that actually report the facts. They're not going to be the same. Just like, a police officer who interviews four witnesses to the same event, if they all tell the same thing, the detective knows that they're lying, because only by conspiring together can four people see the same thing. So what I read the Gospels as if they are a true report of events. And so there are discrepancies. There are things that people get wrong. I don't think magically, even though I believe the gospel is inspired, I don't believe that magically makes every single word some kind of, absolute truth. These are people telling you something happened to them that was remarkable. So that's how I view it. I view it as like there's more evidence of the resurrection, for instance, than there is of the assassination of Julius Caesar. And the only reason that we believe instantaneously in the assassination of Julius Caesar is because it's not a one-off event, and the resurrection is a one-off event. So we've never seen a resurrection, but we've seen assassinations. So we just believe them naturally, even though the evidence is pretty sparse. When it comes to the myth, and this is where Jordan and I think, because I haven't spoken to him about it lately, but this is where we differ. The whole question of faith is whether something is happening inside you or outside you. What is the source of it? That is the question. So when you have a myth is generated by the human mind in collaboration with reality. The human mind sees itself in reality and creates a myth that describes himself. And so it's fair to look at a myth as a psychological event. When Christ arrives and the myth or a myth is played out in real life, then we start to say, oh, wait, some of these psychological components of the human spirit were actually kind of prophetic. They were actually a knowledge of reality that we had in part before we now received it in full by the presence of Jesus Christ. That's what Tolkien meant by a myth that has really happened. This is something that we didn't create. This is something that we are responsible to. It is not responsible to us. So while it might be fine to say the myth of Eros and Psyche tells us that the force of Eros and our minds are very much interlinked in a secret way, and that would kind of play into Freudianism, that it's not right to say if you believe in Jesus, you are expressing a psychological problem, that this is an emanation of your psyche. You are responding to a historical event. You're going to respond to it as yourself. You're going to respond to it with all your problems. You're going to respond to it with all your past, present, and future are going to be part of that intercourse. But what faith is saying to you, and what faith is the evidence of, is that this has happened outside of yourself. And so there is no human objective experience. This is really important. Our experiences are always subjective. That doesn't make them untrue. A rainbow is a real thing, but it's only a rainbow when you see it. It's not all those colors until you see it. So you create the rainbow, but it's a real event. It is an actual event. It is the human experience of an actual event. Everything that we know, everything is a human experience of an actual event. And you can get this wrong. You can believe that you saw a dragon walking down the street. You may have a disease, you may have taken LSD, and you may see a dragon walking down the street and you would be wrong. You would be incorrect. But the very fact that you can be incorrect means that you can be correct. And so when you say, I am beset by evil forces trying to destroy me, that may well be true. That's something that you have to examine and say, oh, wait, there are in fact forces trying to destroy me. And the question is, are they outside yourself or are they only inside yourself? And I believe that they are in fact outside yourself, working like everything else in your subjective life. And so does that make sense? Am I getting too...
Yep. No, absolutely. Okay. No, it does.
So,
and I mean, go ahead.
So you asked me about my experience of the myth.
Right.
And my experience is that it broke me out of the cul-de-sac of my own self-regard. And my problem, for instance, with Jungianism, Jung understood that Freud was a dead end because he's just thought everything was coming out of your body, and that's a dead end. But Jung is a cul-de-sac because he never will break free of this idea that it's a collective unconscious. That's a very weird phrase. Is it a collective unconscious because we all are the same, or is it a collective unconscious because we're all seeing something that is real? And I believe that B is true, and I believe that when you have faith in that, you have to plunk for it and live as if it were true. And once you do, you begin to see, oh yes, it is true, because your life will go much better in the same way your life will go much better if you believe in gravity, even though you can't see it.
Well, this is what's sort of maddening about the Jungian perspective on this is they would sort of look at the inside-outside binary and say, well, it's necessarily both. The collective unconscious is the entanglement of the inside and the outside. And the reason that we find ourselves attracted to these timeless myths is because it's tapping into that collective unconscious. But I mean, I don't know. What do you make of that, Andrew, if we were to just pull the thread a little bit further on the myth question?
Okay, well, this was Coleridge talks about this. If there is a spiritual reality, let's say a moral order, let's make it simple. There are some things that are right and some things that are wrong. And if you went to a planet on which everyone was a Nazi, they'd all be wrong, every single one of them. Every single one of them would be wrong, even though every person that they ever knew existed was a Nazi, they would be wrong, okay? And so we have these visions of a moral order, but they start to get kind of mixed up. So there are some things that are absolutely wrong, but there's some things that are gray area, and what do you do in this area and all that. And what Coleridge said is that what Christ is the example of what it is to be a human being who sees God fully. And we can't become that example, but we can imitate that example. And so it's just, he's sort of like, what would it look like to be a human being who got it right? Oh, it would look like this. And so we have this language for that. We say he's sinless or something like that, which it just sounds like he's a nice guy. But like, no, what it's saying is that he is seeing reality. And if you read the Gospels, you can hear it in Jesus's voice. He's constantly kind of baffled and annoyed, like, what am I going to do with you people? You do not see what's right in front of your eyes. Why are you weeping? Why are you worrying about tomorrow? When Jesus sees Mary from Bethany mourning her brother Lazarus before he raises him from the dead, Jesus cries. He weeps because she's one of his best students, and she can't see that he is the resurrection. And so this outside inside thing, it is very complex. It is the task of life, and Jesus is like a guidebook to it. And so that's how I see um, the myth of it, is that you now return to these myths and find that, that they are true stories, but they're not complete stories because they're internally generated without any model to base them on. And that's why C.S. Lewis brilliantly rewrote the Psyche and Eros myth in a very different way, basically saying, here is what that myth looks like if you understand that some of it is happening outside yourself and only some of it is happening within yourself. And called Till We Have Faces. It's a brilliant book that actually explodes Jungian thought in a way, because it just says stop to put it in Jesus' original language, stop futzing around and believe that this is something outside yourself. You're not seeing right and wrong because of evolution or game theory or some nonsense. You're seeing right and wrong in the same way you see the computer in front of you, the sun in the sky. You're seeing it because it's there. It's just hard to see it rightly.
The narrative bookends of Christmas and Easter are such embodiments, of course, literally, of the singular nature of the Christian myth that Nietzsche picked up on, Nietzsche hated, and that I'm sure there are ascendant factions on the right in many places of the West that detest right now as well. But I'm curious, this is my big picture question, Andrew, what you make of whether this Dickensian celebration of vulnerability, of caring for the weak, is a glass half full or glass half empty? Like, is it the fact that, in a secularized West, Dickens is still appealing, that we don't reject Dickens and say this is foolish? Is it glass half full or glass half empty, that we celebrate this Christian tradition, that we still use the word Christ, Christmas, from a Christian perspective? Is that essentially really good or really bad? Should we be optimistic or pessimistic about that?
Well, you're always optimistic and pessimistic. You're
Yes.
pessimistic because everything human ends. Your life ends, your city ends, your country ends, your empire falls. All things die that are human made. But you're optimistic because you feel that we're in a life that is larger than life, and that's the Christmas story. In Dickens, and maybe my favorite scene in A Christmas Carol is the meeting between Marley, the ghost of Jacob Marley, and Scrooge, and it's a catechism. Marley asks questions of Scrooge, and they are the basis of his reclamation. So, man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not? That is what he says to him. This is Ghost speaking. So he's saying, do you believe there is a mortal soul or not? Are you just a piece of flesh that comes and goes, or do you believe in me or not? And he lets out a howl that terrifies Scrooge. And in his fear, Scrooge says, I do believe. I must. I have no, I'm just too afraid not to believe. And that's a very human thing to say. I just cannot believe that I'm just this piece of meat. And Scrooge says all the things that a modern materialist would say. Marley says to him, why do you doubt your senses? You're seeing me. You see me right in front of you, just like we all see ourselves. We all know that, like, Andrew is not this. He's not this hand, this piece of flesh that comes in. I know that I'm something more than that. So he says, why do you doubt your senses? And he says, well, a little thing affects them. I can't believe in them because if I swallowed a toothpick, I would see all kinds of ghosts and fairies. And that's when Marley lets out this howl, basically, and terrifies them and says, just plunk. Do you believe in me or not? Take your choice. And I guess what I think is that is the place we're at now. We're all confronting that because the world is offering us some new choices, and it's going to offer us one choice. I'll get to in a minute. That's going to change everything, and it's offering us the choice. If I cut your penis off, you'll become a woman. All you got to do is put on a dress and a string of pearls. I look at this guy in the health department. What's his name? Richard Levine. He calls himself Rachel Levine, and he swans around in this woman's admiral costume, and says that, oh, we have to castrate boys so they'll all be like me. And if you'll just come to my office, I'll show you the evidence, which doesn't exist. The evidence. So I believe this guy belongs in Arkham Asylum with the other costumed supervillains from the Batman comics. It's like, and yet people like take him serious, deal with him seriously, and then they call J.D. Vance weird because he has a wife and family, and so, so I think we are all being asked these questions, and I'm op, I'm optimistic that some people will get them right, which was all we ever got. It was never, the church may have been powerful at some point, but Christianity was always a minority religion, in the sense that the people who live by it were always the few because it's hard and you know, it detracts from things in the moment. I, Uh, Go back and give me your question again, so I know I'm following the right path of this. What is your
Yeah,
what do we? Yeah.
I mean, should we see the glass half full, or should Christians see the
Oh,
glass half full or half empty in the world where, Christmas is still celebrated? Christmas Carol is still on TV, but the day has become about commercial experiences, about material experience, gifts, etc.
you have to understand what Christianity is, as it were, about. It is about you. It is not about what other people are doing. It is not about the fact that the world is a corrupt and wicked place. It always was. It always will be. We're not here to make the world a better place. Jesus never says, go out there and make the world a better place. He even says, give your money to the poor, but the poor you will always have with you. You're not accomplishing anything. You're not accomplishing anything. Give your money to the poor, because when you open your hands, I can fill them with something better than the money that you're giving away. He's always telling you what to do for yourself. He is saving souls. And you don't save souls. This is to me the on the conservative side of the political spectrum, the great lie that religion is good because it makes society better. And religion makes society better. I think it's better to have a society where people gather in churches and pray to God than not. But the Christian religion does not tell you that society is going to get better. It tells you that in the world you will have trouble, but I, Jesus, have overcome the world. That's what it tells you. And that's different, you know. And that's why the question is always you. It's not like I think it is an interesting thing to talk about, for instance, this young woman who slept with 100 men in 14 hours. And you can't help but think about it and talk about it. And closing your eyes and not saying anything about it isn't going to get you anywhere, because it's going to be a subject that people talk about. But that's not you. The question is, who are you? What would you have done in that situation? Not what men's nature is. Who cares? Who cares what men are like? Who cares what women are like? What do you like? What are you doing? It's God comes for us one at a time. And that is why people always pick on Christianity because it doesn't attack slavery. It doesn't say slavery is wrong. It says, if you're a slave, do this, right? But it makes slavery impossible. All the great abolitionists were Christians, every single one of them. There was no, without Christianity, we would still hold slaves this very day. It's Christianity that destroyed slavery, but it never said destroy slavery. It never says that, you know. And why is that? It's because at every moment, Nazi Germany, 1950s America, India in poverty, you know, the palaces of the greatest wealth on earth. This is who you should be. It doesn't tell you to set aside your crown if you're the king. It doesn't tell you to turn away from money if you're a successful businessman. It doesn't tell you to do anything but live in Christ, which means to let go of certain things that the world holds, valuable, and and hold on to certain other things. It basically tells you to replace power and sex with love. That's basically what it. Let's cut it. Let's bring it down to its basic basic ideas. And it tells you that you are in an encounter with a person who's nicknamed God. Okay. I don't know what he's called formally, but his friends call him God. And so it tells you to become one of his friends. And that is something only you can do. You can't make society do that. You can tell society about it. In fact, you're obligated once you realize how joyful it is, once you realize that it solves so many of life's difficulties. So many things come, because things are pounding in your head. Or what'll I do if this happens? What'll I do if that happens? Read the New York Times. The New York Times is the anti-Christian newspaper. You pick it up and says this might happen, and if that happens, catastrophe. That's every headline in the New York Times. It's not things this happened and therefore that. It's always this might happen, and if that happens, catastrophe. And it's always untrue, but it makes you worry. It makes you afraid. With Christ, you just lose that. You just think like, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. And so when you ask me if I'm optimistic for you. I think if you open your heart to Christ, you will be saved. And when I say saved, what I mean is you will be joyful and actually find the eternal part of yourself that you will then recognize forever. That's what I mean by that. Your life will be more joyful. My life since finding Christ has been 100,000 times more joyful than it was. And I was actually at that point fairly happy dude. It's just that, and now I'm, getting old. I know that time is short. I know that all the things that I love will be taken away from me. I know that everything that I enjoy about life, and I've always been a kind of worldling who likes, alcohol and sex and television and all those things that, yes, and sweaters and all this, I mean, all of those things will go, and yet joyful I remain, even in the sadness of that fact. I don't deny the sadness, and yet I remain alive vital and alive in Christ. And so I'm optimistic that that can happen to you. I'm not optimistic that it's going to happen to society. I happen to think things are changing for the better in society. I have suspected the things that I'm seeing happen now, I have been predicting and foreseeing for 20 years. So I'm optimistic that they have come, this good change in society. But America will fall. America will die. It'll lose sight of its values and probably become a mighty empire, and then it'll crumble and fall, and some other thing will come in its place, or nothing will come in its place. We don't know. Because that's the way the world works. Things rise, they fall, people live, they die. I appreciate people like Elon Musk who understand that if you don't get off the planet, eventually the planet will die. I think he's right about that. I think go to Mars, Elon. Good luck with that. That's a great idea. But on Mars, things will be built in the fall, and countries will exist and die, and eternity is elsewhere. And I think that we can live in the moment with hope and with pain and with suffering and with happiness and with joy, but we can also live in eternity at the same time, with a great deal of vitality that gives just a great deal of vitality to your life. So I'm optimistic for you, and I'm optimistic that I can grow deeper in my love of God, and I'm optimistic that friends of mine who haven't found God will, and friends of mine who have will go deeper in their relationship with Him. But society rises and falls, and I'm just hoping that you young folks won't destroy everything before I'm gone. Like, wait for me to go, and then have at it, do all you want. I would like, I was born with the extraordinary good fortune of living through the greatest generation, the easiest generation of America. I didn't have to go to war. The depression that we went through in 2008 was nothing like the depression of the 1930s. It's been kind of a smooth ride, and what I would like is to glide out. You guys can all revert to savagery and eat each other, but just wait till I'm gone. That's all
I can make no promises on that, and you heard it here first, folks. America will die. Merry Christmas from Andrew Klavan.
Well, it's just, that's the way it is. Everything goes. As I used to tease Ben Shapiro, I used to say to him, because he was so pessimistic and everything was so grim, and I was always optimistic. I would say to him, you're sorry that it's not 1954. I'm just glad it's not 1934, and that was the difference between us. And I used to say to him that he was like a doctor who tells his patient I'm sorry, you're going to die. And the patient says, well, how long have I got? And he says, well, 60, 70 years probably. It's like everything dies. It's a question of when, it's like, it's always the Lord of the Rings thing. Not this day. Let it not be this day.
Andrew Klavan, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your thoughts on Christmas with us.
Well, Emily, it's great to see you. And anytime, I'd love to come back and talk again.
It was so wonderful to have the opportunity to sit down with Andrew Klavan. Like I said, this was a little Christmas gift to myself to be able to talk through some of this with Andrew and hopefully to bring in some questions that people from different faith backgrounds or no faith backgrounds might have had about what it means to celebrate Christmas in a very different time than, say, Charles Dickens was writing in. Just a fascinating discussion that we were able to have here with Andrew Klavan. So thank you. Just know how grateful we are for you, our viewers, our listeners this Christmas. And as we head into the new year, head into a new presidential administration, we will be here covering all of it. So please make sure to subscribe to the Undercurrents channel here on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Merry Christmas, everyone.